Hello, everybody. Lindsey from Coach Perry, and I am flying solo again. Yeah, as I said last time, Brad's wife is not well, so we will crack on and carry on. I know he's the smoother of the two operators with loads of radio experience, but hopefully I've learned a thing or two from him over the years that we've been doing this together. And I am indeed very excited about our guest today, um, Professor Mike Stroud. And he is a British physician and he's best known for his pioneering work in human nutrition, endurance, and survival in extreme environments. So, yeah, very much looking forward to it. He is a consultant gastroenterologist and professor of clinical nutrition at the University of Southampton, where his research and teaching challenge many of the assumptions people hold about diet, supplementation, and long-term health. So I'm going to bring Prof. Mike Stroud onto the call after that mouthful, but welcome and very much looking forward to what you've got to share with us today. So, yeah, I think let's dive in. I mean, you've had a pretty fascinating career. Um, yeah, you've been involved in clinical medicine research and on some polar expeditions. So yeah, tell us how nutrition and endurance, in particular, became central themes for you in your research.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. I trained as a doctor and started sort of in hospital medicine. But I went into medicine with a view to heading off on expeditions and things, which I'd always enjoyed. I went up mountains and stuff as a kid with my father. And when the opportunity arose, quite early in my career, after I qualified, I joined British Antarctic Survey and went down to Antarctica for the first time. And like many people that go to polar regions, I kind of fell in love with it. And so it wasn't long after that first Antarctic, if you like, formal trip that I got the opportunity to go off on an expedition called the Footsteps of Scott, which had the aim of repeating Scott's journey to the South Pole, but without the dying part in it, and went to Antarctica. Yeah. I went as the doctor rather than on the expedition itself, and spent a year down there, living in a little shed with some others and doing some research on our fitness and our diet and our weight and this sort of stuff. That led to an opportunity a year or so later to join someone who was a very well-known explorer called Sir Ranulph Fiennes on what was to be a whole series of interesting expeditions, several up north trying to get to the North Pole, just with what we had with us, just setting off, pulling our load, very heavy loads across the Arctic ice, and other things with him. Perhaps the most significant being we were the first two men to walk across Antarctica, which was a 95-day walk, entirely self-contained, pulling 220 kilograms of food each, and finding out some interesting facts en route, in particular that you can lose weight by exercise even if you're eating 5,500 calories a day, which is what we have with us. I then went back into medicine, but now had an interest in kind of nutrition and performance. I should have added I'd become an advisor professionally. I left medicine itself and was working as I became the chief physiologist of the government on human performance, advising the Army, Navy, police, firemen, anybody that wanted to know about optimal human performance in different things. But I missed medicine itself, went back in, became a gastroenterologist, but with a particular interest in clinical nutrition, the nutrition of my patients and other patients in the healthcare system. Sick people tend to need special nutrition, and I had that as an interest and expanded my interest into, well, continued my interest in performance nutrition, if you want to call it that. And that's where I am.
Brilliant. Look, anyone who knows you, who is on the pod, knows that you're really not scared of pushing against the current, and you personally really feel like supplementation as part of nutrition is overblown and overdone. So yeah, maybe just talk us through a little bit. It's hard to distill that many years of study and experience into a few minutes, but yeah, maybe just unpack a little bit kind of where you've gone in. Yeah,
I mean, my starting point is, as well as medicine, I've got an interest in anthropology and where we've come from, evolution. I did a degree separate to the medical degree in human evolution and genetics. So my starting point is that evolution is fantastically good at getting things right. In that over millions of years, it homes metabolic systems and our handling of nutrients perfectly, and gets the balance of what we should be taking in and what we need very, very closely modulated. Now, I do accept that many people in current form, since the advent of farming and changes in diet and then industrialization and processed foods, etc., are eating stuff that's way off evolutionary design. So in that sense, we need to be thinking about, well, what would be our natural intake? And if we're using something reasonably close to that, do we really need anything special in addition, high levels of this or that vitamin, additional completely different supplements that the body hasn't met, etc. And my conclusion is, well, no, of course we wouldn't. So you then come to, okay, well, what is our evolutionary diet? And it is clear, to my mind at least, that we are omnivores. So throughout our evolutionary history, we would have been eating not throughout in early evolutionary history, we might have been entirely vegetarian, but certainly in the evolution of hominids, we would have been into meat and veg. But the idea of man the hunter and living off a mainly carnivorous diet, I think, is farcical. For 95% of our evolution, at least, we would have had a very, very predominant vegetarian diet. And so I'm not surprised that vegetarian diets are reasonably good for you, but I don't think that we should be all vegetarians. I mean, you may want to be a vegetarian for animal welfare reasons, but it's not going to be the ideal diet. So a diet that's high in vegetables but does contain a moderate amount of meat and not too much, or as little as possible, I guess, of processed or ultra-processed foods is going to give you everything you need. There's a slight caveat on that. I'm a bit worried about elderly, sedentary individuals. And that's because I think you need a reasonable amount of food, of lots of mixed origin and lots of different types in your diet to be meeting your evolutionary biology needs for the day. And so I think that particularly elderly patients, probably not your audience, but who are locked into residential care and doing very little in terms of activity and maybe only eating 1,200 calories a day, I think it becomes quite difficult to get all your micronutrient, even macronutrient needs out of such a small diet. But for those who are relatively active, your audience, eating good quality food with lots of variation is going to, and especially omnivorously, is going to get them there without taking anything extra.
So, yeah, like one of the things that I find as I've gotten into my late 40s is that I've definitely noticed a decrease in appetite. So, and this, I mean, essentially what you're talking about is really what my mom taught us from a very early age is eat lots and eat lots of variety, and that's kind of how I've carried on. And one of the things you said to me off air is that there's a definite overemphasis on protein. Now, as I've gotten into my late 40s and my appetite has declined slightly, I've probably put a little bit more emphasis on proteins than I have in the past, because you read all about, you've got to repair the damaged muscles as we get older. We're losing muscle mass, and it's certainly one of our big themes in the business is like, how do we reverse that trend of muscle mass with aging? And so it's easy to put that a little bit of an emphasis on protein. So if you're maintaining a high workload, I mean, I still train in excess of 10 hours a week, but with a declining appetite. Kind of, how do you advise people to meet that balance? And yeah, maybe talk a
Mm,
little bit. And I mean, quantity is always so hard for me to quantify. So perhaps give us some ideas on how you would manage that on your own plate or plates through the day.
okay, so I am going to be disagreeing with what everyone is hearing all the time. So the UK recommendation for protein intake is 0.75 grams per kilo. It may be the same in South Africa, or the US is very slightly higher than the UK, I'm not sure. But you're talking
I mean,
about,
ours is like 1.1, I think, is the
is it?
per
Okay,
gram of. So I mean, it's a lot. That's why I'm
okay,
saying it's hard to get that in.
okay. Well, I would argue it's completely unnecessary. So if you are healthy, it's very different if you are ill and having there's a lot of issues about protein handling and metabolism when in sick people. But if you're well, you will stay. Now, this is for a normally active individual. You can stay in normal nitrogen balance. In out is fine, on as little as 0.35 grams of kilogram of protein. And that's because of adaptation. So it's amazing how little you can get away with and not be losing muscle or anything else more than anyone else. And the 0.75, the UK type figure per kilogram, equivalent to 50, 60 grams of protein a day, which is a palm-sized piece of meat or a piece of fish, will keep everyone in balance. And if you eat more than that, what you see is all of the excess goes out in your urine. You just destroy it. I mean, it's calories, but it's not adding to anything. Now, most people in the UK eat at least what your South African recommendation, 1.1 grams per kilo, is, and more. So I would argue that, they're eating 100 grams of protein a day, maybe 120, unless they're absolutely massive. They are way over. They're often a good 2 times, 3 times what you need to stay in balance. And so all of this excess protein is not necessary. However active you are, I'll come back to that in a moment, perhaps. And actually, whatever age you are, because you've got so much spare anyway that it's not going to make any difference to take more. Now, I have looked, and the studies that say, as you get older, you can maintain muscle mass with additional protein over the maybe recommended basic is fairly important. But actually, if you look at them carefully, no, the studies don't show that. Certainly in terms of functionality, which I mean muscle strength and limb muscle size, you don't see a benefit from studies that have given low levels versus high levels of protein, with or without. I mean, some of the studies have gone with or without anabolic testosterone. Some have done them with or without resistance training. And in the resistance training, for example, there is no difference in muscle function or size in higher versus lower levels of protein intake in a 6-week, 3-month resistance training program for older adults. Where has the myth come from? Well, there is a difference, at least in some of the studies, in lean body mass when you are on the higher protein intake. But what the studies didn't do was, or most of the studies didn't do, was look at what that was meant by lean body mass. Now, lean body mass consists, yes, of muscles and legs and limbs, but it also consists of organs. Organs are lean body mass. Water is lean body mass. And higher protein intakes have been shown in those who've made the effort to differentially study the mass of limb musculature against trunk lean body mass, show that all of the extra lean body mass is in the trunk. It's actually nearly all in water, liver mass, and kidney mass. Why are your liver and kidneys made bigger by taking too much? I'm using the term too much protein. Well, because the body has to get rid of it. Because too much protein, and we can come back to this as well, is bad for you. It's not only that it's not helpful and it's just a waste of your money if you're wading into various shakes or whatever, because it's all going to go down the pan. It's actually, I would put it bad to you in several ways, which, as I say, we can come to. And so your liver revs up to handle all these extra amino acids that it can't leave lying around. Your kidneys rev up and get bigger to get rid of this nitrogen load that it doesn't want. And so your body defends itself, and the apparent benefit in lean body mass, which people take to mean muscle, and it isn't, when you eat higher protein, whatever your age, is tosh, I would argue.
Okay. No, that is super interesting. Look, and I think it's also a good point then to kind of start steering into the performance pathways, because I mean, really, it just that explanation doubles down on the fact that you want a wide variety. And what I can tell you from my personal experience is that if I reduce the amount of protein that I was eating, because it's also extremely filling, and that might also explain why I then struggle to generally meet my nutritional needs, because I just feel like it's too much food. So from a performance point of view, what does that kind of balance feel like? And then maybe if you can unpack it in two different spheres. One is the support. So that would be your day-to-day nutrition. And then the other is the physical performance, getting the best out of your training and getting the best out of your race day.
If you're over 50 and want to recover from sessions faster, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join Lindsey and I for our upcoming Faster Beyond 50 Masterclass. In it, we'll show you how we helped a 70-year-old run a 47-minute, 18-second 10K, and how you can take those exact same principles and apply them in your training. Simply scan the QR code that's on screen right now, or click on the link in the description below to save your seat in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there.
Well, I mean, if you like, I just made the argument that, even as you get older, defending your muscles is about training, not about extra nutritional intake. You have to be eating a reasonable amount of a nice varied diet and meeting minimum protein requirements, if you like, but they're much lower than, pretty much everyone will meet their protein needs. Now, if you're training, the argument seems to be that, because we want to build muscle, and this particularly applies to the gym bunnies who are looking to for physique, if you like, as much as performance, but perhaps performance and physique. There's this thing, well, you must need more protein, mustn't you? but it doesn't work out if you actually look at it. So I've said that, your protein needs are 50, 60 grams a day, palm-sized piece of meat or whatever. Now, the most, even if you were starting at a very low level and working extremely hard in your training, resistance training, particularly perhaps so that you are building muscle, the most that you might expect to put on muscle-wise would be 1.5 kilograms a month would be an incredible muscle build.
Huge.
Yeah. Now, when you do the calculation, 1.5 kilograms of muscle a month. Remember that muscle is largely water, so that weight in muscle is not that weight in protein. You'll come down to your excess amino acid needs, if you like, protein needs, are about 10 grams a day. Now, you're eating way more than 10 grams per day over your needs. You're probably eating 50 grams a day over your needs.
Yeah.
So there's no possibility that you're going to run short of amino acids in your efforts to build your physique and your performance. It's just not going to happen. Why should it happen? So you are going to think you need lots of extra protein. If you do, are going to increase your lean body mass, but it's going to be kidney and liver trying to detoxify the protein poisons that you're putting on board. And you'll waste your money on protein shakes and bars and things which aren't required. And as I said, I think you'll put yourself at risk. Now, the risks are, the risks that are big. Stressing your kidneys, well, that's a myth unless you've got kidney problems. Calories, when you take your shakes, you are going to, there's a calorie load for them, and in some cases that's going to be an issue if weight control is what you want. Protein intake, as you said, does tend to suppress appetite a bit and rev metabolism a bit, so it's got a very small role in body weight regulation. Higher protein diets might contribute very slightly to maintaining a healthier body weight if you're overweight. But the ones I worry about most are that high protein intakes have detrimental effects on bone and calcium metabolism, which is worrying as you get older, and your bones will tend to thin even if you're active. Even worse is they stimulate, particularly animal protein sources, release of growth factors, which are almost certainly the cause that meat eaters have more cancer than vegetarians. If there's studies showing that if you've got prostate cancer, for example, and the marker of prostate cancer called PSA is raised, showing that there's cancer activity, if you go and switch from a higher protein meat containing diet to a lower protein vegetarian diet, you see that PSA drop in 6 weeks. It moves towards normal, showing that your intake your protein intake, animal particularly perhaps, is stimulating cancer growth, etc. And then, from my background in clinical nutrition, I became aware, and it became a great interest of mine, that there was the story that very sick patients have got very high protein demands. They do, because when you're sick, you rev up protein turnover, and your body is trying to get, from an evolutionary reason, it's trying to get the amino acids it needs to do new things, build your immune system, mount your inflammatory response, etc., to help you. And evolution has chosen that it will damp your appetite down and tear your muscles apart to get at what it needs. Now, that led to a whole interest over decades of people saying, well, we know that people tear themselves apart and ended up really wasted when they've been severely injured or ill. Let's give them extra protein to support that, and that will help. And it became clear over time that not only did it not help, it made things worse. Right. And that's because an amino acid overload, I've already said, you have to divert your liver and kidneys into dealing with this because it's not wanted. That applies in sick people as well. And it became clear, or has become clear, literally in the last 5 years or so, that what is happening is that the high protein intake is inhibiting cell death recovery. You aren't clearing the debris from cells dying properly. This applies in healthy individuals as well. And so you are knocking off your ability to clear the normal debris of metabolism, cellular life in everyday function. And so, higher protein intakes, I think that the people who are piling through, the extra protein, looking for it in every bar and shake and things that they can find, are going to pay a long-term price in terms of cancer and aging. I don't think it supports longevity. I think it will do the opposite.
Yeah. So look, that's massively interesting, and I think I think it's obvious that most of us are probably taking in too much protein. But in terms of, we're talking about broad spectrum. Get most of your stuff from a variety of sources. But yeah, just maybe give us like some context on what does that look and feel like. And again, both from a health point of view, but also performance point of view. So a lot of our listeners they may be in their 50s and 60s and 70s, but they're still trying to run good half marathons, good marathons. And so, what is that nutrition and the macronutrients in particular? What do those macronutrients look like that will support that health and performance?
Okay. What I'm not is a sports dietitian. So in terms of interpreting foodstuffs into their macronutrient content, I can't claim any real expertise at saying that this meal, that meal, that particular vegetable, meat or fish or whatever contains this, this and this. I know it to some extent, but many of your listeners will know more than I do. As I've said, if you are eating, obviously this depends how big you are, etc., but it doesn't depend how active you are, really. If you're eating 60, 70 grams of protein a day, you're probably eating plenty. If, as most people, you're perhaps near 100 grams, so that would be, the equivalent in portions of high protein food like fish or meat would be a palm and a half size chunk or across the day. Then you're getting definitely more than enough. If you're eating much more than that because you're either a rampant steak eater or you are piling into supplementing everything you can find to supplement and drinking protein shakes, etc., then I think you're into a risk area long term, which will not be of benefit to you. There is something I think, probably in the story of timing. So, although it's gone a little bit out of fashion again, there was the story that guess if you do some training immediately after, your muscles are kind of crying out, for substrates to do the building, which is necessary after. This is the way that training works. So training, in a sense, damages your muscles and then they repair themselves stronger than they were at the outset. And there's a call for amino acids to do that at the time you've trained. Now, it turns out that it's probably not at the time as that you need to be getting your protein as you leave the gym, or getting your protein as you warm down from your run. But there's something to be said for getting your protein, probably, although it's probably marginal, in the 2-4 hours following. So there is something to be said for having a mixed macronutrient content in every meal that you have, and eating something with carbohydrate as well, for that matter, to restock your glycogen stores and things in muscle, and protein perhaps to help with the benefits of the training you've just done in the hours after you've done your training. That makes sense, but most people would do that anyway, just because you would, if you went out for a long run, you'd come back.
No, that's where you'll be surprised. People don't, but that's sort of what I'm getting to. So we know that we've got to take in carbs, we've got to take in fats, but you've given us really nice kind of guidelines on the protein, but what do those guidelines look like for carbohydrates, for fats, in terms of daily, enough to kind of support an active lifestyle?
Well, I mean, your body is actually, especially if you're active, phenomenally good at keeping energy balance, making you eat something close to what you need. And that even applies, oddly enough, to people who slowly become overweight and things. If you actually calculate the difference on a daily basis between intake and output, calorie sort of wise, over the 5 or 10 years that someone went from being lean and young to massively overweight as they became older, you'll find that you can calculate it down that it's extremely rare for the daily energy balance, if you like, to be out by as much as a single stick of Kit Kat. I assume you have Kit Kat in South Africa. It's a tiny difference over a long time. So energy-wise, your body is going to be getting it about right, especially if you're active. Now, my comment about especially if you're active, which most of your audience will be, is that when you are an active individual, evolution, going back to where I started about how important it is, evolution expects activity. There was no way that evolution allowed for, even as you became older, for you to become completely sedentary, which many people are, of course. So our body weight regulatory systems and things, expect you to be moving around, because the tribe, extended family in which you lived in Paleolithic times had to roam about finding food, etc. And finding food, of course, was potentially difficult. I mean, the things that have changed in an evolutionary sense that make us get things wrong with our nutrition are this change in activity. It doesn't really cost you very much in terms of activity to fill your shopping trolley in the supermarket. And then the shopping trolley stuff is prone to be filled with junk. And the ultra-processed food story, I find deeply convincing. I used to think that the overweight epidemic had to be activity-based, because genetically there wasn't. I thought that genetically there wasn't really a story for people becoming overweight, because from a genes change pretty slowly, and so if you go back 100 years, we've got the same genes as now, but there were very few overweight people. And I used to think, well, that's because everyone used to have to be active, because they didn't have a car. They went out to work and did more physically active jobs, and they didn't sit in front of the television all evening. And I thought that was the be-all and end-all of it. In fact, I now believe that that's wrong, and that's a relatively low component. Although, having said that, I should add that the idea that physical activity alone can't affect your body weight is another modern myth. I can tell you that if you walk across Antarctica pulling a heavy sledge, and you eat 5,500 calories a day, I lost just over 20 kilograms, which I'm a small bloke, wow. And that's a lot. And you could work out that my average energy expenditure was 8,500 calories a day, which is wow. Your basal metabolism plus getting on 3 marathons, a day. So you can lose a weight through activity if you go for it hard enough. But back to where I was, it turns out, I think, that the ultra-processed food story is, they're incredibly dense in macronutrients of all sorts, yeah. But particularly fats. Some of those fats are not even natural fats. Your body has never seen them in evolutionary terms. So how's it going to be coping with these strange compounds that are made by hydrogenation and industrialization of food? The answer is it's not. And then on top of this, very abnormal exposure to macronutrients and to a certain extent micronutrients, taste enhancers and things that make you love that food and pile it in, excessive salt, at the simplest level. Is it, I think, a true story that there's a genetic susceptibility to your susceptibility to the food environment, to the abnormal, non-evolutionary, unnatural food environment. And so genetics does actually play a role when I thought it hadn't. And that some people are just really susceptible to losing their normal, fantastic regulatory functions of taking in what they need for what they're doing, and having them overwhelmed by the food trolley full of junk. Not sure that really answers your question. In terms of carbohydrates, I think that I don't know if it's become widely known, but there was the idea of carbohydrate loading for distance and things that I think has turned out on better quality, bigger studies to be pretty fanciful. That's not to say that, if you go and run marathon distances, for example, you will leave yourself completely depleted of glycogen, and you will have a need for more carbohydrate in the next 24 hours or so to restock it again, particularly if you're going to run a marathon the next day. I did 7 marathons in 7 days on 7 different continents at one point, which was an interesting nutritional test. But the idea that lots and lots of carbohydrate will super stock your glycogen stores, especially perhaps if you depleted beforehand, it's probably a complete myth. If it isn't, it's so marginal it doesn't really matter unless you're a competitive elite athlete.
Like I always unpack it to people like this, is that even if you did that, you're going to extend your natural stores by minutes rather than hours.
Yes.
And so exactly. you are going to need to take in exogenous carbohydrates while you are exercising anyway. And so the idea of preloading that, and considering that as we go into exercise or into an event, we typically reduce activity. And so we already have this calorific excess going into any event that we do. So I kind of feel like the idea of shoving more is just very stressful for the human body to deal with before you go into a race. So.
Okay, but exogenous carbohydrate also has limitations. One, it can't actually keep up with the demand because you can't absorb it that quickly. And 2, and it may be particularly applicable in South Africa in the summer, although there is the kind of story that having carbohydrate in the drinks, it increases your ability to absorb water as well from the small intestine. That's a lovely idea, but the more glucose carbohydrate sources in the drinks that you have as they go down your mouth into your stomach, the slower your gastric emptying. So if it's winter and you're staying in reasonable hydration status is not the critical limiting factor in how you perform your long distance efforts, then okay, exogenous carbohydrate, but not too strong a solution is going to perhaps help a little bit, but probably it's almost better to get used to the idea of working when you're carbohydrate deprived, if you like, and becoming better, training your body to be better at delivering energy to your muscles from your endogenous fat supplies, which you can do. The trouble is, of course, that you have to get it trained, you have to kind of be running beyond the wall, so that's one of the difficulties when you're training for a marathon, isn't it? That you the sort of training that's really going to help in the second part, last third perhaps of the marathon, is the training that you do when you've gone beyond halfway point, 2/3 way point, and that takes time. It's just difficult to make yourself go and train that much.
So I mean, the phrase that I try to use there is that we burn fat in a carbohydrate flame. So having small amounts of carbohydrates available to burn the large amounts of fat, that's kind of that's
I get that.
To explain that.
I'll buy. But yes, so right. A bit of exogenous carbohydrate, but be careful if it's a very hot day in the South African summer, when actually staying hydrated is going to become a really dominant issue, and you don't want to delay your gastric emptying. At the same time, I'm thinking Tim Noakes, he's the South African exercise. I'm a Tim fan when it comes to, my God, it's dangerous to overdrink lower sodium drinks in order to try and maintain your hydration status over perhaps a slower marathon time than the elite, because you're going to dilute yourself and get into trouble, and that too many drink stations are a menace in marathons. But
so that's a whole new chapter which we and we have unpacked that on a previous pod, which don't have time for. Mike, we really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for coming on. Lots to think about. And at the risk of oversimplifying, I think the reality is that if you can do your shopping and this is crazy if you go into a supermarket these days. But if you go into the fresh food section, everything is there that you need. I think the sad reflection of where we are is that the fresh food section is tiny, and the section with the boxes and the tins and is enormous. But if you're doing your shopping out of the fresh food section and you are mindful about your nutrition, you are probably going to get it right. And that the only time to really start looking around for supplementation is if you, for whatever reason, live a life where there is a major macronutrient lacking. I think perhaps I'm thinking in extreme cases of vegetarianism, or you genuinely are someone, as someone pointed out to me the other day, but I absolutely hate preparing food. So if that's you, maybe, but I think for the vast majority of us, if we are mindful about what we are eating, we go and buy it fresh, we're probably going to struggle to get it wrong. I think that's the message that I've taken out of today's call.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks very much for having me.